The only thing that actually moves the needle, though, is doing the thing. You can plan all day. You can compare options all day. But if you never actually take the action, it doesn't matter.
How have you personally handled dealing with the things that scare you?
I feel like I was even more under a microscope now. I'm not going to do this perfectly. I'm not going to be the perfect Thunderbird, but I know I am helping people. And no matter what anyone else says, I know that to be true.
I am so humbled to introduce the one, the only Mace, Michelle Curran. How are you today?
I am awesome. I'm excited that we're doing this in person.
Me too. I am such a fan, and it has been incredible doing the research on you and sitting down just to discover everything that you've accomplished in your career. And I think an opportune place to start is to share that you're actually an F-16 pilot and a former service member of the U.S. Air Force. What does it mean to you to have that kind of accomplishment under your belt?
All the interviews I've done, I've never had it asked quite in that way before. I think about, I was on active duty for 13 years with the Air Force, and sometimes the days were long, sometimes the weeks were long, and it was hard. There were challenges, but when I look back, 13 years went by in the blink of an eye. I'm proud of that time, and I feel like I accomplished everything that I wanted to accomplish when I decided to join the military and more. And I made amazing friends, have amazing memories and experiences from it. And honestly, highs and lows, there's nothing about it that I would go back and change.
Why did you want to join the Air Force?
Yeah, I wish it was a simple answer. The initial reason, I needed a way to pay for college. So I was, midway through high school, small town in Wisconsin, about 4,000 people. Medford, Wisconsin is my hometown. I came from a very working class family. They really, instilled a work ethic in me, as well as the importance of doing well in school. So I had good grades, but I did not have a college fund. So they're kind of like, let's figure out how we can put these good grades to use. And we started to explore scholarship opportunities. And my dad actually brought up ROTC, and initially I was resistant to it. I was probably about 16 years old at the time. In my head, I wanted to be a normal college student, go to parties, live in the dorms, do all the things I thought normal college students did. And the idea of being an ROTC made it sound like it would be like more regulated and restrictive. Explored it a little bit further, and then I started to see all the opportunities that came with the military, the world travel, the exciting careers, being part of a team. And that was kind of the thing that drove me to actually apply for it. At that time, I did not want to be a pilot. I didn't not want to be a pilot. I just didn't know that much about it. I had no exposure to aviation or really to the military growing up. And my dream in high school was to be an FBI agent. So I applied for an ROTC scholarship through the Air Force, planning on doing just 4 years to pay back my time and then getting out and applying to the FBI. Obviously, a pivot happened at some point.
One thing that we kind of have in common is that I serve this country in a different kind of way. I'm a former criminal prosecutor, and I specialize in special victims crimes, and obviously, namely domestic violence. And what's so incredible about seeing a strong woman take an incredible machine like an F-16 under her control is that it demonstrates control and strength and the ability to hold yourself together, keep a calm mind, sense of self. I was trying to get the numbers right in terms of how many, and there's so many different resources out there. What is the percentage of women that served as Air Force pilots?
Pilots in general, I believe it's about 20% women currently. Fighter pilots, it's a much smaller number. When I commissioned in the Air Force in 2009, about 2% of fighter pilots were female. Now it's up to about 4.5%. So we're making progress. It's slow. Over a decade, it's doubled. And I notice there are more women in fighter cockpits. I see it on my social media. I hear about it from other people. But it is slow progress.
Something like that, a statistic like that, there's an immense amount of responsibility. How have you managed that?
It's been a journey. It's been an evolution. So when I first said I wanted to be a pilot, I was so fixated on that goal that I did not think of it in terms of gender at all. I didn't think about the fact that I was kind of breaking barriers, that I was going to be one of the only women, if not the only one, in every unit I was part of. I just wanted this dream, right? And then I get into training, and I'm quickly the only woman in a class of 25 in pilot training. And to get a fighter aircraft out of that class, you have to do really well. For a class of around, 20, 25, they usually get anywhere from 1 to 3 fighter aircraft. It was competitive, to say the least. As we got towards the end of that course, it started to be highlighted to me in, I guess, a negative way by just a few of my peers, that I might have an unwritten advantage because the Air Force would be hiring me as a diversity hire, essentially, which was extremely frustrating because I was working so hard in that program to do well. So that's when I started to become more aware of it. As I went through F-16 training and as I got to my first combat unit, it was just something that I became kind of like hyper aware of. And I went from, I was being a high achiever wanting to do well to feeling like I had to excel at an extreme level to prove that I deserved to be there. And it was kind of different things that were pressuring me. It was my own desire to not have anyone that was around me doubting if I deserved that spot. But I also felt like I carried the responsibility to set the reputation for all female fighter pilots. So if I'm really bad at one skill in the jet, now the reputation in the entire F-16 community is that female pilots aren't good at whatever that thing is. And it was a burden. It was a responsibility that I did not want. I also felt like I had the responsibility to set what was acceptable in the squadron. Like if something was said that was borderline inappropriate, people would realize I was in the room, the conversation would stop, everyone would turn and look at me. And I'm a brand new lieutenant. I'm in my early 20s. I'm just trying to figure out this really difficult career field. And I see all these people look at me to decide if I'm going to be cool with it or if I'm going to push back and tell them that it was inappropriate. And that's not my job. That should come from the top down. I definitely felt like it was a burden. Later on, and I'm sure we'll get into it, as I eventually went into more inspirational roles in the military, started to fly in the air show scene. I saw it as an asset because I saw that I could connect with a whole portion of the population in a different way. But it took me quite the experience to get there. Just a lot of hard years, a lot of self-doubt before I got to that point.
There's so much to unpack there. Yeah. And, I remember when I was in the DA's office, I would be so frustrated because there'd be these cases that came across my desk and I would have to handle them. But I didn't ask for those cases, but they became my responsibility. And the way that you just talked about it in terms of a burden, like you didn't ask for it. You just wanted to be a pilot. And yet you're endowed with this crazy responsibility and an obligation almost that whether you like it or not, you're representing all women and all female fighter pilots, particularly in the U.S. Air Force, where at the time, right, like 2%. That's such, at the same time, you're like 1 of 1%, right? Because you're the level of precision, dedication, commitment, skill that's required. Let's talk about the experience of being in the actual F-16 for a second. Yeah. I remember the first time I got after I finished my service in the Israeli military 2 years, I got my single engine Cessna VFR pilot's license. And I remember the first time I did an S-turn and I had felt the power of just the G's on my body. When it's in an F-16, there's a different kind of animal that I can't even begin to understand, but maybe we could help the audience understand the amount of gravitational pull, what that feels like and what the carryover is into life.
Everyone has a little bit of experience with G-forces. Even on some commercial flights, on the initial climb during a takeoff or during turns, you'll feel a slight amount of G-forces. It's probably like a G and a half, 1.5 times the force of gravity. On like a extreme roller coaster, you might experience maybe 4 times the force of gravity. So if you weigh 100 pounds, you feel like you weigh 400. The F-16 pulls 9 Gs. So 9 times the force of gravity is kind of hard to explain. I think when we're young, new pilots, and we're just starting to experience those things for the first time, you go into pilot training and you're in an aircraft that can pull 6 Gs. And that feels like it's kind of novel, right? Because it's exciting, it's new. And then you move to another aircraft where you can pull 7.5. And you're like, well, that kind of hurts now. And then you get to the F-16 where it can pull 9. And it's not fun anymore. It's no joke. It's painful physically. Like that's a lot of pressure on your body. You're also operating on the knife's edge of what you can stay conscious for, with the G's pushing towards your feet. They push the blood out of your head very quickly. So we do a G strain, a unique breathing technique. Wear a G suit to help squeeze our lower body to push the blood back towards your brain. But if you were to just relax under 9Gs, it would be lights out in a split second. You'd be unconscious. Obviously, that's serious when it's a single pilot aircraft, right? And you're flying 500 miles an hour. Bad things can happen. Not an enjoyable experience, but it was also something where you appreciated the maneuverability and just the power of that aircraft and of human engineering. The fact that you could go out and fly that airplane like that day in, day out, and did what it was supposed to. You did not feel like there was any risk of a mechanical failure because of the G-forces. We had amazing maintainers help support the team to keep the jets airworthy. And honestly, you get used to it, as silly as that sounds. Like, your body adapts somewhat, so your G tolerance goes up, and you're able to stay awake at 9 because of that. But it's still something that we did not take lightly. And early in my career, I struggled with 9Gs to the point where I almost G-locked in a jet, which is G-induced loss of consciousness. Other F-16 pilots have hit the ground because of a G-lock. It's a big deal. And later in my career, flying for the Thunderbirds, one of my maneuvers was the max turn, which is doing that flat 360-degree turn, 8 to 9Gs for a lot of it, 150 feet off the ground. So that's just a crazy contrast for me personally to imagine how I was kind of scared of 9Gs early in my career because I didn't quite know how to handle them. But I eventually was able to get to a point where I was doing that, week after week in an environment where there's just no room for air. 150 feet is nothing. Yeah, it's one of those things you have to respect, but it also is one of those things that just drives some appreciation for what you're capable of in that aircraft, like what we can do when, the Air Force as a team comes together. And I will say I do not miss pulling 9G. I don't.
In doing my research for the Thunderbirds, I was looking at the formations and like the precision, how close everyone flies together. I mean, there's an element of trust that comes along with that, collaboration. Could you help the audience understand in that environment, how are you managing your emotions, your headspace?
Yeah, the Thunderbirds are an extreme example of trust. And I think one of the best visual examples that anyone could really present is when the Delta is together, which is all 6 jets. In that formation, we fly as close as 3 feet from one another. And we did, loops and rolls. And I've shared videos on my social media before of the loop where, you're going uphill all 6. As you come over the top, there's a point where you're put in 90 degrees at the ground. And those of us on the wing are staring at the jet next to us just to maintain our formation position. Thunderbird 1, who we call the boss, he's looking forward. He is responsible for all the parameters, the airspeed, the attitude, the power adjustments, all of that. We are just listening to him on the radio, his calls as he makes adjustment in his cockpit, and adjusting our position to the visuals we see as the aircraft next to us moves. We're not looking forward at all. There's not once during that maneuver where you have the opportunity to break your attention from the wing of the jet next to you and look forward at where the horizon is, how fast you're going, if you're starting to pull up when you should be. So you are 100% trusting the person next to you with your life. Like, no doubt about it. That is a level of trust you have to excel in that environment. And it doesn't happen overnight, but it happens very quickly. Our training season from the time we join the team until our first air show is November to March. So, 5-ish months we're there. What I always say, I think, is the key to that trust being achieved so quickly is we have a common mission that's very clear to everyone. Every person on the team understands how they contribute to it and believes in it. No one is there that doesn't want to be. It's competitive to get there. And the team's not just the 6 pilots you see at the air show. It's 130 people.
Oh, wow.
So there's a big support element to it, maintenance, public affairs, just like admin of all different types. Like, it's a team effort for sure. But I think the biggest thing is kind of this like feedback, accountability, and ownership culture that's created in fighter squadrons in general, but especially on the Thunderbirds. Like, we are watching every single practice, every single air show, whether it's the first one of the year or the last one of the year, from the tapes in the cockpit. So you're going to pull up the recording of the heads-up display with the airspeed, altitude, all that stuff for each jet. But you also have a camera at show center in a position where like the audience would normally be watching the jets, and it's zoomed in. So it sees every little deviation. And we sit in a room with everyone that flew that flight, and we tee up the next exercise or the next maneuver, and we go around the table for anyone that was involved in it. And you fess up to any deviations you had before we play it. And if you don't fess up to them, we're about to see them anyway. So there's no hiding anything. And the reaction to mistakes is not, how could you do that? You don't deserve to be here. That's like, you're putting us in danger. It's not shaming. It's not to ridicule the person. It is purely, okay, I see you got a little bit wide there. What were you thinking? Well, like, where was your focus? What were you doing with the controls? All of that, so that the more experienced people on the team can be like, next time, try this instead. Try to make this small adjustment. It's all with the goal of getting better for the next flight. Better for the crowd, so it looks more perfect to them, and safer for all of us. And it very quickly becomes the norm that we don't hide the mistakes, and we openly share them with no fear of reprisal, just so that we can all get better.
In an environment like that, where the stakes are so high and there's such an incredible amount of accountability, how has that type of transparency translated to your everyday life? Do you maybe find that you're too honest about things, or is there like looking in the mirror and holding yourself accountable?
I think it's given me just an openness to feedback. And I always tell my clients as a keynote speaker, I'm like, I want to hear your feedback. And that's not just saying that, right? Like, I want, if something didn't land, if something felt awkward, if communication wasn't good leading up to an event or something, I want to know, because I have that mentality. I want to fix it for next time. And just being open to feedback in that way, whether it's from my speaking clients or it's from my team or whoever it is, has really, I think, allowed me to grow very quickly, because people don't need to walk on eggshells. They can just be honest, and it's not taken personally, and we can just move forward with a common goal. And I wish more people operated like that, because I think we can really get in our own way when we let our egos get in the way of getting valuable feedback. And so creating that open communication with, in the workplace or in any environment, just makes everyone so much better.
Let's get into the heart of what you're doing now. I know that, and forgive me if I'm speaking out of turn, I'm trying to use your own words from what I can recall, is that at one point you struggled with your identity, particularly when you were in Japan. Mm-hmm. And being stationed in Japan as well as Afghanistan, there's this crazy, like maybe a culture shock, or it's the compounding cultural elements of being in a foreign country, but also the team culture that you have to deal with while you're in the U.S. Air Force. I mean, I can imagine there's a crazy amount of overstimulation that, on top of it, an immense amount of reasons to doubt yourself. How did you overcome that? How did you manage your mindset to get to a level of security that you're currently at now?
It did not happen overnight, that's for sure. And you described that really well. In Japan, I had a really hard assignment. It was my first combat squadron. And I can't tell you it was exactly one thing that made me struggle. It was the combination of being kind of isolated on the other side of the world from all my family and friends, being in a culture where I didn't speak the language. Your whole world shrinks. It becomes everyone on base that you work with, who you also live in the same apartment building with, who you see at the grocery store on base. Like, there's no work-life separation. That's everything. And combine that with the stuff I already kind of mentioned, of feeling that extra pressure and scrutiny of being a woman in that environment, with being a beginner in just a really difficult career. And I'm sure you've experienced that in law as well. Lawyers and doctors resonate with this a lot. You go through so much training, so many years of schooling, and it's hard, right? And you feel like these victories as you learn these things and you do well and you test well and you graduate, and it's all so exciting. Then you get to the actual job and you have an identity crisis, because you've always been good at everything. You're a high achiever. Your parents are so proud of you. You just graduated law school. You just got your fighter jet that you wanted. And then you get to the actual job and you know this much. Like, it's the tip of the iceberg, and you're thrown into the fire, because There's no way to learn it without experiencing it. Definitely high achiever, a perfectionist, all of those titles. I was just been good at things. And I got there and I think I was pretty average, but that felt devastating to me. And average in that environment means you struggle for a while. You are bad at things. You fail on missions. And that just like shook my entire identity. I was like, I don't deserve to be here. Somehow I snuck through all of these wickets of training. And maybe that guy in pilot training that told me I was going to get a fighter to check the box was right? Because now I'm here and I'm struggling. I think the thing that kind of shook me out of that was twofold. I moved to a new base. And so I don't want to discount the power of just moving to a new environment.
Sure.
That was a huge opportunity for me to decide how I wanted to show up, to reflect back on Japan and realize that I wasn't really happy with how I was showing up as a person or an officer or a pilot. And it was like a clear line in the sand where it's like, okay, these people that I'm going to work with now, they don't know about this struggle that I've just had. I get to write a new history with them. And then I got there and they were so welcoming. And that squadron, people, I mean, they were still fighter pilots, so they still had some of the cliches that everyone has from watching Top Gun, but they were just a lot more diverse in terms of how they showed up at work. People talked about their families, their hobbies. People left work if they were done with their stuff for the day, if it was 4 o'clock and their kid had a soccer game. Like, it wasn't all consuming. Where in Japan, we're so separated from everything else. You were at work. I mean, a 10-hour day was short. You were at work anywhere from 12 to 15 hours a day with the same people all the time. And as I got to Texas, which is where my next assignment was, the work-life balance was just better. And I all of a sudden realized that I could just show up as myself there and I wouldn't be ostracized. And I also think I got into a point where I was just like, I can't do this anymore. I can't pretend to be something I'm not, and I'm struggling, and kind of just screw it. I'm just going to start showing up as me and see what happens. And they just welcomed me with open arms. And I made such amazing friendships there. And that was a place where I was at a point in my career where I had enough experience after 3 years that I was just had a lot of opportunities where I could test myself a little bit and prove to myself that I was capable, which is how you build confidence. I had become a flight lead already, which meant I could take a 4-ship of jets out and lead them through a mission. I became an instructor, which is like the next level up. So I'm actually teaching new pilots. I got to deploy and prove that I could survive and do well in that environment. I got to go to Poland for a summer and teach in their aircraft, like in a different country, like fully embedded with their Air Force. It was just one thing after another that felt scary and uncomfortable. But I was like, okay, I have regrets from Japan. I have opportunities that let pass me by because I just did not want to fail in front of anyone. I was so afraid of giving anyone evidence that I didn't deserve to be there. In Texas, the more I put myself out there, the more I did those things that felt uncomfortable, just again and again, I proved to myself that I could actually do it. And those things got bigger. And eventually, that's what got me to the point where I saw the email for the Thunderbirds. And I was like, read it. I actually meet all these qualifications. And for the first time ever, I have belief that I might actually be capable of getting hired and doing that job. So I submitted an application.
When I hear that, it sounds like there was this almost emotional fatigue of letting yourself down to the point that like you just can't do that anymore. Like you know that you're capable of more. There's something inside you that's like, I know I can do this thing.
Right.
And for whatever reason, I'm not showing up. I'm not meeting the standard that I'm setting for myself. And when I put myself in a position like that, I know from personal experience, I just got fed up with not being the person I knew that I could be.
100%.
And that kind of fatigue, or just, what's the word I'm looking for? Just, I think we're just going to stick with fed up. Like you have to be honest with yourself. Maybe some of the lessons about transparency that you've learned through accountability and sharing the mistakes that you make. Also knowing what mistakes you make when the gravity of flying an F-16, where, like you said, there's very little room for error and there's definitely no room for complacency. And I'm sure once you get to a certain skill level, you could kind of phone it in, if you will.
Yep.
No matter how cool the helmet is or how incredible the responsibility is, there's still this jadedness that comes along with it. And to constantly check in and manage your ego and yourself, I think you've provided an immense amount of firsthand experience and value for the audience to be able to understand. Maybe they could audit their own life and see, where am I phoning it in and being complacent? But I should be more accountable and understand that this is a privilege, whatever it is that I get to do. So now you're in this next chapter of your career. And I don't want to miss the opportunity to continue to talk about the Thunderbirds, but I think part of what I really appreciate about your career now is how much you focus on imposter syndrome, how you've dealt with self-doubt. And I promised the audience at the top that we would talk about imposter syndrome
For sure.
and how to overcome your fears. So how have you personally handled dealing with the things that scare you?
It's been a journey. So that time in Japan, those 3 years, I did not deal with it well, and took me to a point that I was not expecting to be in as I achieved this dream I've been working towards for so long. Then we get to that phase in Texas where I slowly start to crawl out of that. Then we get to the Thunderbirds, and now I'm in the public spotlight. And you better believe I felt imposter syndrome there. Like, people think you get to the Thunderbirds and they're like, oh, this must be like, these are the best pilots. They must be really confident. They have no doubts. Like, why would they feel any self-doubt when they're on camera or putting themselves out there on social media? I feel like I was even more under a microscope now, as now I not only am carrying the reputation of female pilots in the fighter pilot community, now for the general public. We're performing for millions of people. And just the weight of that I struggled with. And there were points where I would kind of shut down a little bit, and I would resist the interactions with the crowd and the public because I felt like my energy was just being pulled so much by having to be so public facing. It took me probably till halfway through my second season of 3 to kind of realize why I was there. The initial draw to the excitement was the exciting flying. The mission sounded rewarding as well, but the flying you got used to eventually. As crazy as that sounds, I wouldn't say it becomes mundane, but it becomes routine. You do the same thing fairly often, doesn't vary a lot. But what started to be the motivator was these interactions with people, especially girls and women, especially like little kids, seeing their eyes light up, seeing them see someone that looks like them doing something that in an airshow environment is almost like superhero-esque to, a 6-year-old, was just so cool and so rewarding. And that started to give me a clear reason as to why I was doing what I was doing. And having a clear why and a clear motivation that felt really authentic. It wasn't for anyone else. It wasn't to impress anyone. It wasn't to do like this cool flying. It was because I felt like I was changing people's lives in a positive way. That empowered me as well. My inspiring interactions with them inspired me to just have this clear why that felt authentic. And that helped with imposter syndrome so much. Because when I would have those moments of doubt, I would be able to be like, okay, I'm not going to do this perfectly. I'm not going to be the perfect Thunderbird, whatever the heck that means. But I know I'm helping people and I know why I'm doing this. And no matter what anyone else says, I know that to be true. And I've taken that into speaking as well, which also intimidating because now I'm going against the status quo. I'm leaving active duty Air Force, when I think most people thought I would just stay and do 20 years. I'm not going to fly for the airlines, which means I'm taking this complex skill set that I've built over a decade and kind of just setting it aside. So a lot of people are like, why are you wasting that? I got should on a lot in comments, like, you should be doing this. You should be doing that. Why are you not doing this? But my why was so clear. I wanted to continue to inspire people. I wanted to use the stuff we talked about so far to take my personal experiences, the journey I went through, and then, to have this just visual of being on the Thunderbirds and to kind of give people a peek behind the curtain, behind that, what looks like perfection, to show that we're just people. And when you realize that everyone is just a person everyone has self-doubts, everyone has missteps. It opens other people's eyes to what is possible for them like nothing else can. And so my moments of self-doubt still happen, but the why is just so clear to me and it's so strong that they're very fleeting. And I can quickly get back to focused on my mission, and that kind of supersedes any doubts.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Inside the Inspired. My name is Jonathan Cohen, and I have a quick favor to ask you. If you're getting any value out of this content, please take a second to subscribe to the channel. You help us reach more people, and you can also stay up to date with all the latest content coming your way. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll catch you in the episode.
You have incredible frameworks for how people can overcome imposter syndrome, self-doubt, and tap into being a badass, right?
Yeah.
So how are you coming up with these frameworks? How are you going? Are you auditing your experience and going through questions that you asked yourself at the time? There's a lot of actionable clarity. I don't know if I've ever put those two words together back to back that comes from, and I've tested them myself. Having those intense experiences under your belt, when you go back and reflect on those experiences, is that how you're coming up with the frameworks that you're now sharing with the world?
Yes. So initially, what drove me to write my first keynote that honestly has stayed fairly intact over the last 2 years. It's gotten better. It's been tweaked to do my workshops, to do the course that's going on right now. All of that starts with me looking back and being like, what was I struggling with? Why was I struggling with it? And do I think other people struggle with it? And when I was in those moments, I did not think other people did. I thought I was the only one, right? I was living in my little vacuum of, sure, everyone else is very confident and I'm the only one that's not. As I started to go out and give my speech initially, like 2 years ago, on imposter syndrome and self-doubt, the feedback was incredible. I had leaders of Fortune 100 and Fortune 500 companies coming up to me after speeches and being like, I have felt that way my whole career. Like, I needed to hear that today. And these aren't new people straight out of college, right? These are people with decades of experience, with corner offices that everyone else is looking to and respects, and they feel that way. And then I do have the new graduates, the people that are beginners, and they're just like, yes, that's me. Like, I get what you're saying. And I realized that everything in between experiences it. And so that kind of reaffirmed to me that this was something we should be talking about. It's not talked about enough. It's not normalized. It's still taboo. Like, we all walk around like we know what we're doing, and none of us do. And I just got amazing feedback again and again. So I was like, okay, what am I hearing again and again from my audiences? What did I struggle with? And then I think about someone 5 years behind me or 10 years behind me, and like little things that seem simple, but I try to put myself back in my shoes at that point in my life and imagine like how powerful these little mental frameworks, these little adjustments in how we see ourselves, how we see others around us would have been for me then. And then I just start testing them and see what the feedback is. And I'm reminded again and again why I do this, because it's been consistently just touching. Honestly, I get some amazing messages where I'm just like, I can't believe that one thing I did affected you in such an amazing way. And you've gone and done all these incredible things because of it. And then I also wanted to make sure that I wasn't just taking like a one-off experience that worked for me. I talked to some neuroscientists. I've talked to business leaders, people that are in the training environment, in the developmental space. And I'm like, hey, this is this thing that worked for me. Like, does this make sense? And I don't know how much we're going to get into it, but some of the cockpit tricks that I learned, like the wiggle your toes, which sounds silly, there's science behind why that stuff works. And so to see it actually align with research and like established scientific beliefs was just really affirming for me. Because I never want to put something out there that I don't fully believe in. So yeah, it was kind of an evolution, my experience, other people's feedback, and then kind of just a gut check with some experts in different fields.
So let's talk about skill development for a second, because you kind of touched on it there. And the cockpit experience is what triggered that. Repetition is obviously very important when it comes to what you do. How has the value of repetition opened your eyes to maybe overcoming any type of obstacle that you faced in the cockpit or otherwise during your service?
It's a good reminder that we're all bad initially. Like, we're not good at things right out the gate. If it's something that's pushing us, that's like stretching our abilities, that's going to come with a lot of growth, you're going to suck at it at first. Like, I was an experienced F-16 pilot, went to the Thunderbirds, and the type of flying we were doing there, I was never just flying around upside down, much less 100 feet above the ground. I wasn't flying 3 feet from other airplanes while pointed up, like pointed at the ground, or flying head on at each other. That is not stuff you do in the regular Air Force. I think a gift, honestly, to be put in that situation at that point in my career where I finally felt like I was getting good at my craft, and be reminded that I was good at one part of it, but there was so much more that I could learn. And it like forced me back into that beginner's mindset. But 4 months later, we're doing the flyover for the Super Bowl. And a month after that, we're starting our first air show. And just to see the progress, it was such a solid reminder that repetition and practice it can't be discounted. That's how you get good at anything. But you have, in order to go through that journey of not being good and it being uncomfortable, you have to just accept that you're a beginner at first.
So particularly in the cockpit with doing rolls and all of these incredible maneuvers that you're performing, particularly going 100 feet, 150 feet, maybe as low as 100 feet?
100 feet's the minimum. 150 is the target, 100 is the minimum.
So at 150 feet, for the rule breakers out there, at 150 feet, flying above the ground, automatically going into a 90-degree turn to pull up, feeling those G-forces, then going and doing crazy tumble rolls and maneuvers. What are some of the lessons that you've learned from those particular experiences physically, experiencing those physical experiences in your body? What are some of the lessons that you've learned from doing that?
We can do hard things. Like, those felt very uncomfortable at first, but they became very routine to the point where all of those maneuvers became muscle memory. You know, you would find you actually had to fight complacency, which people find that hard to believe because it's such a high stakes environment. It requires a lot of focus. But as you got late into air show season, you've done it 1,000 times at that point. You would find your mind drifting while you're in the middle of a maneuver flying formation. All of a sudden you're thinking about what you're going to do when you land and what you're going to make that night for dinner or whatever.
That's crazy.
It is crazy, but I think it's a really incredible example of how our brains are so adaptable. Like, how things happening at 500 miles an hour and having to make split-second decisions and having to look at very precise things in the cockpit at very precise times or you're going to miss them. With repetition, that your brain gets used to that, and everything kind of slows down, and you're doing an incredible amount of decision making in what normally would feel like a split second, but to you it feels like a normal pace of life because you've done it so many times.
The decision making. I'm so happy you brought that up because I meant to ask you. In life, people deal with the inability to make decisions, right? That analysis paralysis that we all experience. How have you gone about your decision making in your own life as a result of making so many micro macro decisions with such high impact?
You can go too far either direction, right? You can have knee-jerk reactions where you're doing things very quickly without thinking them through when you should be taking a little bit more time. Or you can go to the analysis paralysis where you are just stuck in the planning and the researching, but you never actually go do the thing, usually because you're scared in some way. And so for me, I do like to prepare. I do like to do my research, but I also make sure I draw a line in the sand for myself of like, we're going to take action at this point. And actually in mission planning in the Air Force, we have something called a GICL. It's an acronym. Rhymes with tickle. It's fun to say, but it's good idea cutoff line. And when we're planning a big mission, you have an entire day of mission planning with a bunch of people, and someone's leading that whole thing, and everyone's coming to you with their ideas. Like, we could go this way, we could use this weapon, we could do these things. And you have a couple different planning meetings. By the afternoon, you're like, okay, 3 p.m., last chance for good idea fairies. And then that's the GICL, the good idea cutoff line. We are moving forward with our plan at that point. Otherwise, you put yourself in a square corner where you don't have enough time to actually execute. The only thing that actually moves the needle, though, is doing the thing. You could plan all day. You could compare options all day. But if you never actually take the action, it doesn't matter. And so giving yourself a timeline is just a super helpful way to kind of balance those two things of not having a knee-jerk reaction, not going in unprepared, but not wasting a ton of time without actually doing the thing.
There's so many different elements to your career. Content creator, F-16 pilot, motivational keynote speaker. We didn't touch on author yet.
Yeah, author.
What does it mean to you to be the author of a children's book?
That is purely a passion project, and it has been exactly that. I wrote the manuscript for that book in 2020 during the pandemic when we weren't flying as many air shows, and I had a moment to actually do it. The inspiration was from a visit to the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum in 2019. And then I spent, 2+ years trying to figure out how the publishing world worked and kind of just like submitting queries and just getting no response from anyone, which I guess is normal, but surprised me not knowing that much about the industry. And then when I actually got to find a publisher, sign a contract, get paired up with an illustrator, and honestly seeing the illustrations for the first time was probably the most exciting moment. To see this story in my head of Lily Padilli, the little girl that wants to be a fighter pilot, and knowing why I wrote that story, because I didn't feel like little girls were seeing themselves represented in a relatable character in the high performance aviation. So knowing why I was doing it and then seeing it brought to life in a way that was going to inspire kids was just, I think I almost cried when I saw the cover. It was incredible. And now the second one is coming out in May. What's Your Call Sign? Same characters are back, and there's actually gonna be a third one the following year. I feel like kids' books kind of get written off a little bit. They're like, oh, like you have authors and then you have children's authors. So rewarding. Such a rewarding project to be a part of, and I would do it again 100 times.
I have a beautiful baby girl at home, and I can't wait. Thank you so much. I can't wait to read it to her. All three. Because I think that kind of inspiration, especially at a young age, that's the impact. That's the ripple effect. That's where you can really get in at the ground floor and help shape someone's perception of themselves that carries over to help make good decisions and effective decisions as we grow wiser. This has been so much fun today to sit down and get to know you, learn firsthand from you who's been all over the world flying intense missions on behalf of this country in the capacity that you have. What's also impressive is the duration, right? 13 years. When it comes to all of the content that you put out, all the things that I've learned from you, what stands out to me most is how prepared you are for everything. And I think it's important for the audience as we round this thing out to understand how far preparedness can take you. Can you maybe outline 1 or 3 different things in terms of your own regimen, how you go about your preparation, whether it be transferable skills from your time as a pilot or as a keynote speaker, as an executive performance coach, to help the audience grasp how they can go about preparing for their experiences?
Yeah, so I truly believe that people we think are lucky just have worked really hard and are really prepared. And so when they are in a situation where they're in the right place at the right time, they're able to take advantage of it. Where even if they had been in that same situation and hadn't been as prepared, it wouldn't have played out the same. Because I've been told a few times, like, you're so lucky. I'm like, that's not how that worked. And so I do take that into what I'm doing now as a speaker. I kind of have a checklist for myself, which that like regimented part of being an Air Force pilot and being a pilot in general, we have very specific steps that if you have not done those steps, you do not feel ready to take off. I do the same thing for speaking. It's meeting with the client. It's making sure I understand their messaging, their challenges, tailoring the speeches, rehearsing a certain amount of time. All of that, all the way down to like what I'm going to wear and what they're wearing to make sure that fits. All that stuff, I do not feel ready to go on stage if I haven't done that. I am a bit of a perfectionist, and I've tried to tone that down a little bit because I realize it's not necessarily healthy. And one of the benefits, though, I think of being that way since I was just a little kid is that I always wanted to prepare for things. I don't inherently have the confidence to go do the things. I just prepare until I'm like, okay, I am set up for success because I put so much time into getting ready for these things. And there can be a temptation as you get experience and you get some things on your resume and you get some things in your title to become complacent, like you talked about earlier, to like sit back a little bit and just be like, oh, I've given this speech 100 times. Surely it will go fine. The first time you do that, or maybe the third time you do that, something's going to go wrong and remind you that you still need to prepare. And in the cockpit, that happening can be catastrophic. And so I think it's instilled a healthy fear in me to make sure I'm not going into any of those situations unprepared.
There's a question that I pose to all my guests that I'm not going to pose to you. If the future version of yourself from 10 years from now were to fly in, I think it's the first time I've asked this question that there's actually a pun intended. I think.
Nice. We'll go with it.
If the future version of yourself from 10 years from now were to fly in and offer you some advice in order to get there, what do you think she would say to you?
I think that she would look back and say that I should stay the course, because doing what I'm doing now comes with a lot less security than being in the military did, right? Like, you're not going to get fired in the military generally. I mean, you get in extreme circumstances. You're going to have a paycheck every month. You're going to have healthcare every month. You're going to be working with exceptional people. And now all that falls on me. The responsibility for my business to succeed or fail falls solely on my shoulders. And speaking is feast or famine sometimes. It's ebbs and flows. It's a little bit seasonal. And so I've had those moments where my inner critic, my self-doubt creeps in a little bit and thinks about my friends flying for the airlines who are getting paid very well. And it's like, should I go do that? And I then have those interactions that I kind of mentioned where someone sends me a message and says that they were at a really, really low point, like a point where they were considering, taking their own life. This has happened a few times. And they happened to read a post or see an interview that day or at that time, and it changed their perspective. And they're still here. And now they're sending me a message to tell me that. And that's what reminds me, like, okay, this is worth doing. And so I think those things are going to continue to happen. And I can't imagine how much those ripple effects will expand over the next decade. So I think that she would look back and just offer reassurance, like, you're doing the right thing, stick it out.
Unbelievable. This has really been, in my view, like my vision come true to be here in this setting with you. Thank you so much. Absolutely. I really had an awesome time. I'm sure the audience did too and wants to know where they can keep up with you. Please let them know.
Yes, I am very findable on the internet. macekern.com for all things speaking, workshops, book stuff is there. For social media content, Mace_Kern on Instagram. There's some jet videos there. Put some visuals with some of the things I described today. And then on LinkedIn, I post a bunch of similar content, but it's more geared towards business audiences, towards personal development. And that's just Michelle and then Mace, my call sign in quotes, Curran. You can Google me. I have a Wikipedia page, apparently. I did not make that.
You do.
I have looked at it. It's fairly accurate, I believe. Don't quote me on that. But yeah, I'm very easy to find.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Everyone, thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. This is just, my mind is in so many different places, but I'm still doing my best to stay present because this is really just a pleasure. Thank you. You're an incredible human. And once again, my name is Jonathan Cohen, and this is Inside the Inspired.